It was a dreary Saturday night. The rain had begun earlier the day before, but it still showed no signs of letting up. I turned to look out the window of the crowded car, watching the lake that stretched along a good chunk of the highway we'd now traveled. The clock read 8 o'clock, though we had been on the road since 10 that morning. I could hear the others chatting happily about places they had read about on the internet and wanted to visit. Some local, some a few states away. You see, my friends and I are what you would call amateur ghost hunters. We were fans of shows such as TAPS, Paranormal State, etc., etc., and so we took up the job of ghost hunting. I say job in that fashion because we have yet to get work in the field. We were still fairly new, so, of course, no one was going to hire us. It was something we loved, though, so even if it didn't bring in cash at the moment, we did it. Eric was our fearless leader. Maddie, being his girlfriend, was our top investigator. Kevin was the second investigator, Paul and Kaylee were our tech heads, and I was the medium. Today, we were going to a building that was talked a lot about on ghost hunting forums. It was always a #1 place to see if you were into ghosts and just happened to be in the Central Florida area. The name of it was Harder Hall, and mentioning it would cause any of the locals to talk your ear off about the rumors flying around the place. Construction of the hotel that stretched about 2 acres began in 1925, and it had only exchanged hands a couple of times. Since 1982, though, it had been unoccupied. It was now owned by the city and is on the National Register of Historic Places. Sounds harmless enough, until you hear the darker stories of it. The locals and ghost forums tell of the urban legend of it, that every owner of this hotel has died under strange circumstances, often within the limits of the property. Other ghost stories tell of former visitors who decide to never leave and remain in spectral form. It is also said you can see the ghosts of those who died there, peering out from the windows or roaming the courtyard. Some even go further to say the building itself is cursed. The lake began to fade as Eric turned off at the highway and onto a side road. As we all looked in front of us, we could see the silhouette of the large building looming in the distance. As we drew closer, I noted that time seemed to only affect the exterior slightly. The once vibrant color was now faded. Some parts were muddy, worn down, chipped, or covered in moss. The windows were all intact from what I could see, and only some of the clay shingles were missing. I wondered, if so many hadn't tried to fix it up, would it have been worse off? The car was silent as we all gazed at the building. The aura it gave off was incredible, to say the least. Like an elder that had seen so many years and had so many things to tell. "I'm not sure about breaking in," Kaylee spoke, causing all of us to take our eyes from the building to that of the fence that surrounded it. "He'll be fine," Eric replied with a shrug as he parked the van in the driveway of an empty house across the street. "Besides, I don't see any cops," Maddie chimed in, before hopping out of the van. We all made our way out, and, as quietly as we could, collected our cameras, EMF meters, EVP recorders, and other various ghost hunting equipment that we had all gathered over the years. We crept onto the lot, and quickly climbed over the fence, jogging the rest of the way to the building, quite glad that no one had installed motion detectors or anything of the sort. We only stopped once we were met with the front doors, and, after a little effort from Eric and Kevin, the doors opened, and we were all greeted with the sight of the somewhat open room. I say somewhat because, although the room was spacious, it was littered with debris left from the most recent reconstruction project. "This place is even grander than I thought," Maddie stated as she spun around looking at it all. Kaylee was already snapping pictures, while Eric and Paul began setting up the cameras. There were a few main rooms that fellow ghost hunters had told about. One room on the right wing of the first floor, another on the second floor in the left wing, and finally, the bell tower. I gazed up at the second floor from where I stood, when suddenly, I could have sworn I caught a flash of white out of my side vision. A chill ran up my spine. A feeling of fear swept over me. Not enough for me to run out of there. Though now, I wish I had. After a quick scan of the building, we gathered in the main room, sitting on the rolls of carpet that were left behind. Placing a flashlight down the floor, we told any spirits that would listen to blink the flashlight once for yes and twice for no. Then, we started the questions. Simple ones at first. Is anyone here? Did you die here? Etc., etc. No answers were received, so Maddie spoke up, saying she had an idea for a new way of making contact. She searched in her bag before pulling out a board. On the front, read Ouija. Kevin was the first to speak up, obviously not pleased with the fact that Madison had brought such a thing. "We are not using that, Maddie," he told her. She simply rolled her eyes and sat it down. "We aren't getting any action. You got any other ideas?" she asked as she grabbed a nearby glass on the floor. "The thing doesn't talk to just ghosts, Maddie. That could let out something worse," Kevin quickly replied. But Maddie simply rolled her eyes. To tell the truth, I didn't like it either. My parents had always warned me about Ouija boards. They were portals. And if you didn't do something right, it would leave it open for anything to cross over into this realm. Heck, most of my life I wasn't sure if what I saw were actually spirits or demons. But this? I couldn't see them through this. "I'm with Kevin on this, Maddie," I told her, before she let out a huff. "Then you two cowards don't have to do it. Come on, Eric," Maddie said, as she placed a finger on the glass. Eric paid us only a quick glance before he placed his finger next to Maddie's. Paul and Kaylee followed suit, no doubt already disproving this whole spirit board thing in their minds. Kevin and I sat outside their little circle and watched, hoping that nothing went wrong. Maddie asked if anyone wanted to talk, and for a while, the cup was still. Kevin and I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief, hoping that since nothing happened, Maddie would say goodbye and put the board away. But to our horror, the glass began to move. It slid effortlessly across the board to rest on the yes. Maddie looked up at Kevin and I with a smug grin on her face, before looking back down at the board. "Did you die here?" she asked, as we all watched the glass slid over to the no. We all looked at each other for a moment, unsure of what to ask next. "How did you die?" Maddie asked. "Maddie!" Kevin said sternly, knowing full well that that was one thing you were not supposed to ask. "What? I'm just curious," Maddie shrugged. Kevin was about to say more when we noticed the glass moving again. It moved along the letters quickly, only stopping for mere moments before moving along to the next. Kaylee jotted them down, luckily, and once the glass stopped, we read them back. "What are you afraid of?" We all stared at each other for a moment. "Why do you want to know?" Maddie asked, but the glass didn't move. "I'm not telling a spirit what I'm afraid of," Kevin spoke. I only nodded in response, getting the overwhelming feeling of being watched. "What are you afraid of?" Maddie asked the board, and soon more was spelled out. "Nothing," Eric repeated once the glass came to a halt. "No one cannot be afraid of anything," Paul spoke. "I guess if you're a spirit you can," Maddie shrugged, before looking around. "I'm afraid of going insane," she spoke. "Maddie!" Kevin, Eric, and I stated, not believing that she just told the spirit that. "What? It's not like it's going to do anything with the information. And besides, if we please it, maybe it will talk more," she told us in a matter-of-fact tone. "She has a point," Kaylee said, as we all turned to her in disbelief. Kaylee and Paul didn't believe in these types of things. And yet they were going to go along with this? Playing with the board was one thing, but this? "I'm afraid of suffocating," Kaylee said, her hand resting on her neck lightly for a moment. "I'm afraid of deformity," Paul stated. They all turned to Eric, who still looked unsure, but he slowly took a shaky breath and added, "I'm afraid of extreme cold, like ice, frost, stuff like that." They all turned their attention to us. I simply shook my head, getting the fight or flight feeling from this whole situation. Something wasn't right. "Kevin," Maddie spoke. Kevin shook his head. "Come on, man, it's okay. It's probably best that you get it off your chest," Eric commented. Kevin took a deep breath before saying, "I'm afraid of wild animals." There was a giggle from Maddie before she replied, "Is that why you won't go to the zoo with us?" "Hey, shut it. I didn't laugh at your fear, okay?" Kevin spoke in a ticked-off tone, though I could tell he was trying to hide his embarrassment. Soon, though, the room fell silent, and their gazes turned to me. I simply shook my head. "Come on, Sophie, you're the last one," Maddie crossed her arms. "No, this was your idea, not mine. I'm not saying anything," I told her sternly. "Sophie, it's not hard. You just—" Eric stopped as we all saw the glass start moving again. "It's okay," Kaylee read back. Maddie simply shrugged, and with a simple, "If the spirit is fine with it," she went back to asking questions. I didn't like this room, though. Or this building, for that matter. The emotions I had felt earlier had only intensified, and it was taking all I had not to pass out from them. I tried to concentrate, though, to see if I could pick up on who or what Maddie was talking to. "Well, if you could show yourself to one of our cameras, we'd really love it," Eric said after the conversation had become slow. All was quiet in the hotel for a moment, until we began to hear footsteps on the second floor. We all quickly turned to each other. Eric was already standing before he and Paul made their way up to the second floor, left wing. Kevin and I looked at each other before nodding and following, Kaylee and Maddie not far behind. I would say that our first mistake was not saying goodbye to the board. But now that I look back on it, I don't think that would have mattered. The halls were dark. Too dark, since some form of light should have been coming through the half-boarded windows. It was silent, too. Unnaturally silent. Just then, a scream broke through the air. We all rushed to the sound, meeting Eric halfway as he too ran to the sound. Paul stood in an empty room, his back facing us while he breathed deeply and stared into a slightly broken mirror that rested against the far wall. "Paul!" Eric yelled, as he rushed over and turned Paul around. He looked him over, and he was in no way hurt. "Paul, what happened?" Maddie asked as she pulled his hands away from his face. My face," he murmured softly over and over. "Paul, there is nothing wrong with your face, man," Eric told him, but Paul shook his head violently. "Paul, sweetie, Eric is right," Maddie stated, as we all watched as Paul reached up and touched his eyelid, before looking at us all as if asking if he was actually feeling it. We simply nodded, unsure of what had come over Paul. I looked in the mirror and my eye," he said softly, before slowly walking to the door. "Hey, it's okay, man," Kevin said, patting his shoulder. Paul could only nod, but I could feel that something still wasn't right with him. It was as if some of his sanity had been chipped away. "Did you guys find anything?" Maddie asked, looking at Eric, who, in return, simply shook his head. "I say we run a scan over this wing, though, just in case," he added, to which we all nodded. Kevin stayed with Paul, saying he would keep an eye on him just in case he started feeling bad again. Eric paired with Maddie, of course, advancing ahead, while Kaylee and I checked the rest of the room. The rooms were quiet, except for the squeaky floorboards every now and then. Some walls were torn down, while others simply had holes in them. I took a deep breath and tried to concentrate, seeing if I could pick up on any entity that might still be around after Paul's attack. I knew that this is what it had to be. An attack on the mind is far worse than that of the body. My mind went black, looking for any energy that might be there with us. It took me a moment, but finally I saw something. The same flash of white. This time, it was coming from a few rooms over, along with a faint giggling. I tried to make out the figure, but another scream pulled me out of my trance. Kaylee and I bolted down the hall, turning to the room that held a double-over Eric and a shaken Maddie. "What happened?" Kaylee asked as she knelt beside Maddie and tried to wake Eric. I don't know. He was saying that he was cold, then he started calling his brother's name, then he just fell," Maddie said in tears, as we tried to calm the shaking figure of our friend. I was about to say something when I heard it again, the faint giggling. I looked around the room and caught a white streak dart out of the door. My mind flew to Kevin and Paul, and I had the gut feeling that they were in trouble. "Stay here," I told Kaylee, as I grabbed my flashlight and ran out of the room and down the hall to the boys. I could hear heavy footsteps running up ahead, and I pushed myself to go faster. "Paul!" I yelled at the boy who was sitting on the floor rocking back and forth slowly, mumbling to himself. "Paul, where is Kevin?" I asked out of breath. He continued to mumble incoherent words, and I could feel his sanity breaking even more. "Kevin!" I yelled, standing up and looking around with the flashlight. But there was no sign of him anywhere. "Paul, I will be back, okay? I promise," I told him as I ran down the hall. The heavy footsteps started up again, this time towards the main room. I pushed myself faster, and I was relieved when I saw Kevin. "Kevin, there you are!" "Kevin?" Kevin looked afraid as he backed against the railing. No, not just afraid. He looked terrified. Pure horror was painted on his face as he stared at the ground with wide eyes. No, stay back, please! Oh God, please!" he whimpered as he pressed himself against the wood of the railing. "Kevin! It's me! It's Sophie! Kevin, look at me!" I tried. But he just kept asking whatever he was seeing to stop. Tears ran down his cheeks as he pleaded to the air because that's all there was. There was nothing there. "Oh God, please, no, no!" he yelled as he backed away farther, his body arching backwards as if trying to duck out of the way. But in that instance, his balance was lost, and though I tried to grab him, I didn't reach him in time. Kevin fell backwards off of the second-story railing and onto the cold ground below. Tears filled my eyes as I stared down in shock and horror at the now still body of my friend. A scream ripped from my throat as I fell to my knees and cried. I knew then that we had to get out of there. There was something in this building that was not to be played with. Fearing for the rest of my friends, I found my strength and made my way back. Paul had moved from his spot now, nowhere to be found. Kaylee and Maddie were still in the room with an unresponsive Eric, and I was greeted with worried eyes and tear-stained cheeks upon my return. "Sophie?" Kaylee asked hesitantly. Kevin is..." I felt new tears run down my cheeks as my friends began to cry more. "We have to get out of here. This place really is cursed," I told them. But what about Eric? He's so cold," Maddie cried. As I looked over at him, his skin was now very pale with a blue undertone. He looked almost frostbitten. "We're not leaving him behind, Maddie. Don't worry," I told her as I grabbed Eric, and with Maddie's help lifted his stiff body off the ground. "I'll go look for Paul," Kaylee said. We all nodded and left the room. The trek to the main room was long. Eric's body was very heavy and extremely cold, and though I couldn't blame her, Maddie's shaken state left her weak. We finally reached the stairs, and after slowly making our way down, We rested Eric on one of the rolls of carpet. "Oh God," Maddie gasped. I turned to look at her, following her line of sight, only to rest on Kevin's body. A new knot began to form in my throat, and I had to swallow a few times to stop it. "We're gonna get out of here, Maddie," I told her. She nodded and sat beside Eric, brushing some hair out of his face. We waited for Kaylee to join us, with Paul. But after what seemed like forever, their absence was making us both worry. "I'm going to go look for them," I told Maddie, who looked panicked at my words. "Relax, Maddie. I'll only be gone for a little bit. I'll be back, I promise." She still looked scared, but reluctantly nodded. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and made my way back to the second floor. The hall was still quiet. The uneasy silence made my hair stand on ends, and I could only pray that I would find Kaylee and Paul soon, so that we could get the hell out of this place. I checked each room, one after another, but found no one. Slightly shaken, I took the next flight of stairs up, and right away was hit with a dense fog of fear. It was so strong that I had to grab a hold of the wall to steady myself. I was not alone on this floor, that much I knew. "Kaylee! Paul!" I called out, trying to steady my breathing, though I found breathing in general was hard to do. It felt like someone had their hands around my throat, cutting off any and all air supply. "Kaylee!" I called out again, before succumbing to a coughing fit. The lack of air was getting worse, and I began to feel dizzy. "Paul," I spoke weakly now, as I advanced down the hall. My vision blurred for a moment, and I could see a blur of white dash past me and into a nearby room. Rubbing my eyes, I followed it. Though now, I wish I hadn't. I gagged at the sight in front of me. Kaylee hung limply from the ceiling fan, her body slowly spinning as the weight moved the blades. I realized now what the choking feeling I had felt earlier was, and I shook at the sight in front of me. I ran out of the room. What else was I supposed to do? I had to find Paul. I had to get back to Maddie. We had to get out of here. We had to. I ran down the hall, my breathing unsteady as I pushed myself. I had to find Paul. I turned the corner and stopped. There in the hallway stood a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her hair was pure white and fell in wild ringlets over her face. Her dress was pure black, and she wore a dull red jacket. She was still, face pointed towards the ground, and just as I went to speak, she pointed to a nearby door. I was cautious to trust her, but something told me to. I neared the door, my eyes never leaving the girl until I had entered the room. I turned, and what I saw caused the bile I had been holding down to rise in my throat. I retched as I fell to my knees. In front of me laid Paul, but he was far from recognizable. His face was cut off, his eyes hung from the optic nerves as they sucked to the now sticky, bloody meat. His hands were skinned as well, and his shirt was open to show the words that were gashed into his chest. I wiped my mouth with a shaky hand and crawled towards Paul's body. The words were bloody but still legible. "Fosnick, Harif ni-moi," I whispered. Those were the words that Paul had been muttering downstairs. "What does that mean?" I asked no one.
"Only fear. Fear itself,"
a voice spoke to me. I spun around to see the girl still in the hallway. Her voice was not normal, though. It was as if it was spoken by many tongues at once.
"You better go. Your friend is almost to the top,"
she giggled, before walking to a wall and disappearing into it. I blinked for a moment, unsure of her words, but then it hit me. The bell tower. "Maddie!" I yelled as I raced out of the room and up the many flights of stairs. The bell tower was where people had seen the most activity. It was where they had said many had jumped to their deaths. She wouldn't. Please, Maddie. My breathing was hard as I raced along the rotted floors. The workers hadn't reached this high up before having to stop construction, so the floors were more cracked, squeaky, and brittle. Maddie! I yelled, seeing the figure of my friend. She didn't turn, though. She didn't even acknowledge me as she walked. My breath hitched as my face came in hard contact with the ground. Shit! I yelled as I looked down. My foot had gone through the floor and it caused me to fall. Quickly freeing my foot, I started towards Maddie again, ignoring my now bloody nose. My footsteps fell hard as I raced towards the bell tower door, swinging it open. Maddie, please, I pleaded with my friend, who was standing at the edge of the floor that connected to the bell tower. She turned towards me now, eyes dull. She was already gone. Her sanity had finally snapped beneath the weight of everything. Eric is dead. So is Kevin, Kaylee, and Paul. She spoke in a monotone voice. Maddie, we can still get out of here, I whimpered. She simply shook her head. No, we can't. We can't ever leave, Sophie. This is what has to happen. This is what was fated the moment we walked through those doors, she stated, as she lifted her arms out and slowly leaned back. Maddie! I screamed as I ran forward. I tried to grab her arm. The second time that day, I tried to save my friend. But again, it was too late. Maddie landed with a hard thud onto the roof of the 4th floor, and I felt a wave of fresh tears rush down my cheeks as I watched the blood begin to leak from her body. I was alone now. She was right, you know. You shouldn't have come here, I heard a girl speak. Her voice cheerful, yet I could almost feel the venom in it as she giggled. I turned, seeing the white-haired girl once again, though this time, her head wasn't down. This time I could see the snow-white eyes that contrasted to the black pupils, and at that moment, it was almost as if she was looking into my very soul. I stood now, frightened of the girl. Her aura had changed. No longer did it seem harmless and helpful. Now I could only detect malice, and it shook me to the bone. Who are you? I asked weakly. She smiled in return, but the smile wasn't normal. It was larger than a normal human smile. It was one that you would expect the size of the person's mouth to start bleeding from the strain. Fear! She giggled, her voice returning to that of many intertwined. I turned, running out of the door and down the stairs. I ran until I reached the front door, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. No matter what I did, the damn thing wouldn't open. None of the doors or windows on the 1st floor opened. There was no escaping this place. So that's why I'm recording this. On what little battery this camera has. If you can somehow get out of this place, please take this video with you. Let our families know what happened to us. We shouldn't have come here. I know now that it wasn't the Ouija board that started this. We were doomed as soon as we stepped foot into this building. And it doesn't matter if you tell her what your fear is or not. I'm afraid of being alone. That's why I'm the only one still alive. But not for long. Because I'm going to head up to the bell tower now. Goodbye. The two men sat on the rolls of carpet staring wide-eyed at the video that they just watched. They were ghost hunters, yes, but they had never expected to find anything like this upon entering the old building. Maybe we should leave, the one man said, already standing. His partner nodded and stood as well. But just as they were about to turn to leave, they heard something that made their blood run cold. So, what are you afraid of? Hello my little ghouls, Ms.Gothika here. I hope you enjoyed my original story about the one and only Harder Hall. It actually is a real place, and people have been known to die there under strange and unusual circumstances. So I figured it was the perfect place to write my own little creepypasta about. If you are not already and you would like to be one of the little ghouls here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring that little bell so you get notifications whenever I upload. If you like this video, or if it creeped you out in just the littlest bit, go ahead and hit that like button. Comment down below any stories that you would like me to read, and I will see all you little ghouls in the next video. Sweet dreams.